The Obama administration allowed a major terrorist organization to operate as a global drug and weapons cartel. Former CIA station chief and congressional candidate Scott Ulinger joins me to discuss. So when I read this Politico piece called The Secret Backstory of How Obama Let Hezbollah Off the Hook, how the Obama administration just overlooked Hezbollah being one of the largest cocaine and weapons trafficking cartels in the world. There was one guy I had to speak to, my good friend Scott Ulinger, former CIA station chief and now candidate for U.S. Congress from Pennsylvania's 15th Congressional District. Scott, how are you, my friend?
Fine. Everything's great, John.
This story blew my mind. And I sent it to you, and you read it, and you came back to me. And I know you felt it was incredibly comprehensive and that what was laid out in the story seems very accurate, correct, with the way these investigations would typically happen. From your experience as a CIA case officer and then station chief, this seems to hold water. Investigatively, for me, it certainly does.
Right, exactly. I mean, and then right, there's kind of an intel piece to it, and there's a law enforcement piece to it too. So, like the two of us together, you can certainly see the nuances just as well as I can. That's right. But it's very troubling stuff. But when you look at previous actions of the Obama administration to suppress things that go against their narrative, then maybe this isn't surprising. It's just more discouraging news on the international policy front.
Listen, I wasn't surprised by any of it. I mean, nothing the Obama administration did with regards to bad guys, with regards to ISIS. They essentially allowed ISIS to proliferate because they didn't want to crush them. So seeing that they allowed Hezbollah to become essentially one of the largest global crime syndicates wasn't surprising to me when you look at it and understand that they did it to placate Iran. Now, I want to, just as a matter of full disclosure for the audience, Scott and I worked together on his congressional race, but that's not why I've had him on the show today. I want Scott on the show for these matters because he really is the most knowledgeable guy I know. And his experience with this one is on point because he ran U.S. operations against Iran and Iranian assets. So, Scott, the gist of the story is, and I'll keep it pretty simple for the audience, that the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and let me just say that the DEA, and I'm sure you've seen this during your career with CIA, the DEA has an incredibly robust intelligence infrastructure. And in certain parts of the world, it rivals any other global intelligence service, especially Mexico and Central and South America, where they've been operating for so long. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that would be true, definitely.
Okay, so the DEA, in cooperation with, I'm assuming, CIA, and they said 30 other global agencies. I'm sure FBI was involved in ATF because there were guns and that sort of thing.
Foreign liaison services
Foreign
as well,
liaison services, right, globally. They discovered that Hezbollah was not only an ideological, religious, and political organization, but in reality was funding its terror acts, its support for terror, its terror recruitment efforts by running cocaine and guns worldwide. And this reads almost like fiction. There's a central player in all this on Hezbollah's side that's actually called the Ghost. If you read the story, it's pretty fascinating stuff. So the DEA sets up a command center in a top secret facility outside Chantilly, Virginia, where they run these operations. And the intelligence they gather from both a global intelligence perspective and the ability to make domestic law enforcement cases against Hezbollah members and their enablers is ironclad. You read the proposed indictments, you read the letters from the U.S. Attorney's Office, you read the statements, the emails from the DEA agents and the people they were working with. This was cut and dry, slam dunk, one of the best investigative jobs I've ever seen. Comprehensive, well done. The Obama administration blocked them at every turn, and it appears that the Obama administration blocked them to not disrupt Obama's policy of appeasement with Iran and his incredibly stupid Iran deal. So, Scott, did I leave anything out?
No, you didn't really. That really is the heart of the matter. Obama showed many other signs of going way too easy on Iran to get to conclude this disastrous quote treaty unquote that we're now stuck with. I mean, the main thing that comes to mind was I think in 2010 there was kind of an uprising of a lot of university students in Tehran,
right?
And basically Obama sold them down the river. He did not support them, from the bully pulpit, which would have been instrumental in making the regime very uncomfortable. He didn't do that. He sold them out because he wanted to conclude a deal with the mullahs, and this is just part and parcel of it. It's kind of funny that this operation was called Operation Cassandra, which according to right, which is according to Greek mythology, the prophet who was doomed to walk the earth unbelieved, that no one would believe them. So unfortunately, it was an appropriate name because they were not believed, or they were suppressed by the Obama administration.
It's an unfortunate irony. So let's get into the weeds a little bit for the audience. Let's talk about you worked in some pretty hostile places for nearly 20 years on behalf of this country. You recruited spies in places where you could have been killed for doing so. Tell the audience what Hezbollah is trafficking. Hezbollah was bringing in about $1 billion a year, and the article says roughly $500 million of that was profit. They brought in $500 million through various and sundry entities that were profit, about $1 billion a year gross. Tell the audience what a group like Hezbollah uses that money for.
I mean, Hezbollah is basically functions almost as a nation state at this point. I mean, it has a political policy. It even has social welfare policies. In places like Lebanon, it is basically the functioning government. It functions better than the Lebanese government itself. But they're also totally tied into Iran, and their intelligence structure is very similar to that of Iran, and they're very formidable. They're even very formidable from the CI point of view. In other words, trying to penetrate these organizations to learn more about them. They are very sophisticated and can identify spies in their midst.
So when you say CI, you're talking about the counterintelligence point of view. Our inability to infiltrate these organizations.
That's right.
Because they're savvy and they firewall.
Exactly. If I'm not mistaken, there has actually been 1 or 2 Americans who've been thrown into prison for spying for Hezbollah, not a nation state as we understand it, but Hezbollah itself. And so
Scott, let me stop you there, because you say something very, very interesting. So John Brennan, Obama's former CIA director, the guy who has tried to throw Trump under the bus with this bogus Trump-Russia collusion, John Brennan, while this operation was ongoing. This Operation Cassandra started in 2008. Started right before Obama took office. And Obama took office January 2009, obviously. And that's when the roadblock started. John Brennan in 2010, knowing full well that Hezbollah was a global crime syndicate, bringing tons of cocaine in the United States monthly, running weapons around the world, John Brennan downplayed this threat, according to the Politico piece, and encouraged nations in the Middle East and our own government to allow Hezbollah more prominence in the Lebanese political process. That's about one of the worst things I've ever heard come out of the CIA.
That's right. That's another typical right. And it's Brennan was a total disaster as an advisor to the president and as a CIA director, because he's just incompetent. But this is illustrative of the problems we can have in U.S. foreign policy. This idea, his idea was, we need to strengthen the quote moderate elements of Hezbollah. And so we shouldn't just break relations with them. We need to speak to them. But this is the same illusion that has our people for 20 years seeking out moderate elements in the Iranian regime. Well, we can speak to the moderate elements.
Right. Are there moderate elements within Hezbollah? I would not think there are moderate elements.
No, and there aren't. There are not. And just as there are not in the Iranian regime. But, this is mirror imaging in the intel world, very, very dangerous thing to do. You think that they're structured like the U.S. government. There are no moderate elements in Iran. All of them say death to America. Just some of them raise their voices more than others. Right. So to fool yourself into thinking that Hezbollah or Iran, that we can talk to certain people in there because and moderate them, is an exercise in folly, but typical of Brennan.
Well, that's exactly right. And that was the Obama administration's entire feckless foreign policy, right? And intelligence policy. They believed that bad guys would be turned into good guys if you prostrated yourself to the bad guys.
That's right. Whether it was China or Hezbollah or Iran, that's right. It's the same disastrous policy worldwide.
Now, I've spoken to some of my friends in the DEA down here in Miami, and I want people to understand this Operation Cassandra, the intelligence gleaned, told us something very scary. These operators, the Hezbollah operators in this global cocaine and weapons trafficking network, were not limited to the Middle East. They weren't only doing this out of places like Iran and Lebanon. This came into the Caribbean. Venezuela has long been, even before The Maduro regime screwed everything up, and Chavez before that. Venezuela has long been a drug transshipment center. The island of Aruba has long been a drug transshipment center right off the coast. Cuba has been a drug transshipment center. Now, these bad actors, these Hezbollah actors, were incredibly active in Central and South America, using points 2 hours from the U.S., 2 hours by air, in some cases even less. Cuba, for example, is 35, 40 minutes in a small jet from Miami or Key West. They were using those as jump-off points to get the drugs, to get the weapons into the U.S. This was not only a Middle East operation. This was a global network utilizing bad actors from the narco-terror world in South and Central America as well. All of that was overlooked. They were given a pass as well because the Obama administration didn't want this to come back to Iran.
That's right. I mean, right. People have to understand that these are transnational problems because this network of fundraising, the Hezbollah used, was buying used cars in the United States, exporting them to Africa, using that money to finance Hezbollah programs in Lebanon, and all the while they're also, and then bringing drugs back to Venezuela. I mean, Venezuela is the perfect example of, it was totally in your face illegality. I mean, the president Maduro is just totally cooperating with Iran. There are literally flights that go directly to Iran from Caracas, and they load up on drugs and weapons. They bring them back in. Quds Force and IRGC, basically the Iranian SS, I like to call them, bring them back to Venezuela where they can wreak havoc all over the place. In fact, one of the guys was one of the people that was mentioned in the one of the bad actors in the article is mentioned as there's an outstanding warrant for his arrest for conspiracy to kill Americans, and this had to do with a conspiracy to kill U.S. Advisors dealing with FARC in Colombia.
Well, let me tell you why this is so terrifying, and for people that watch the show who aren't here in South Florida, the waterways between Venezuela and South Florida are outside of hurricane season pretty calm waterways. You can you don't need a ship to get your terror actors here. You don't need a ship. You can use a large sport fish, a 50, 60, 70-foot sport fish boat, and come across the Caribbean. It's very, very calm water. Friends of mine and I, we jump on boats, go out to the Bahamas all the time. And in the season, now we're out of hurricane season now, from now till May, very, very easy to make that crossing when you've got a complicit government in Venezuela. Not just complicit, but they're partners in the crime syndicate. Cooperative partners. They're part of the cartel now at this point.
That's right.
These people were very easily able to get into the U.S. We have plenty of small marinas here without a customs presence. In fact, our border security, we talk about the southern border. I know you know this, Scott, but I want the audience to know. In South Florida alone, there are dozens upon dozens upon dozens of marinas that you can come into with a sport fish, and your customs check-in is essentially voluntary. If the Coast Guard isn't popping a hit on your boat and sending ICE or CBP or the Coast Guard assets over to check on you, it's really an honor system to check in with customs, let them know you're coming. Very, very easy to unload some guys in a raft on the beach, come check in, but all the contraband and the bad guys are off the boat. You let them off a few miles out. Very small, very hard to pick up on radar. That's how terrifying this was. This is what the Obama administration overlooked. And with the car dealer, he had 30 car dealerships in the U.S., a network of 30 dealers that were taking these cars and sending them over to Africa, right under the nose of the federal government, and allowed to act with impunity. I mean, this to me is every day it feels like we can say, well, that was the greatest scandal in American history, and it all ties back to the Obama administration.
That's right.
It's unbelievable.
It's true. There was even almost a throwaway line in the article that I honed in on, and it talked about the one of the guys who they were looking at, who they decided to, quote, let go. The quote was a central player in a U.S. cell.
I saw that.
Of the Iranian Quds Force.
Yeah.
But now that's unbelievable. So they're saying, okay, so there are the Quds Force is basically like a paramilitary special forces that Iran uses. Right. So they're saying in the article that there were known Iranian members of this group that were operating in cells in the United States, probably dropped off on a small boat, like you said, in southern Florida. And we just decided to drop the entire investigation. So, we talk about the southern border and security and Hezbollah or other people amongst us, people who are if they get the get-go, they can just shoot up a mall or blow something up. Well, they are amongst us right now, and the Obama administration chose to do nothing.
Well, there was another piece, and I think it was a Fox News piece, and I've referenced it on the show a few times. But the data was from Department of Homeland Security. We talk so much about security on the southern border. We worry about people coming in from Mexico, from Guatemala, from El Salvador, MS-13. What we don't talk about are the nearly 350,000 illegals who've come across the southern border from 34 nations of terror concern. And now we're finding out they might have also been coming in through our waterways, through our marinas on the east coast of the U.S., on the west coast of Florida, still the east coast of the U.S., but on the Gulf side and on the Atlantic side. So our borders are not just porous. Obama, it seems, he opened them up and put out a big neon welcome sign for the bad guys.
That's right. And it's all very troubling. But like I said, it is the Ghost. You mentioned the Ghost. A supplier of chemical weapons to Syria and a cocaine trafficker. I mean, is there anything you could think of that could be worse than that? But they closed this investigation down. Now, hopefully, the Trump administration can resurrect it. But I mean, better than I do. I mean, this was dropped several years ago, and to pick up the pieces is going to be very difficult. They tried to keep the operation running, but at a low level. But I think eventually that petered out. The money ran out.
Well, even harder now, though, Scott. Now that the assets are burned and the operation is public, these guys are going to go deeper underground. I mean, they've been very successful at staying underground. They've got two nation states that are complicit, two nation states that are actively shielding them, Iran and Venezuela. The UN is going to step in and shield them. The UN is going to roadblock anything that we try to do internationally against us. There's not an organization in the world that loves terrorists and bad guys and narco traffickers more than the UN. And so you're right. So let me ask you the question. You're a case officer, but let's say tomorrow President Trump calls you. He says, "Hey, Eulinger, forget that congressional run. I need you as deputy director of you as deputy director of operations back here at CIA. Run in 2 years. I want to task you with starting this investigation again." What do you do, Scott? Where do you go?
I mean, the first thing, obviously, you go back to the original investigation, knowing full well that a lot of those leads will be dead, but you basically have to do a lot of studying and homework to identify the nodes that you have to then work toward recruiting. I mean, it would involve, I've had to do things like this where, like, thick, cold cases, so to speak, I was able to resurrect, but it was because I put considerable effort into research and understanding, where all the nodes were and who to contact and all. So it can be done, but you'd need a huge team to do this. I mean,
it would take a couple of years. It would take a couple of years, right? To get back.
It would take years. It would take 2 years.
I feel it'll take 2 years. That's what I was going to say. About 2 years to just get back to where you left off.
There's no question.
Let alone making a dent.
There's no question.
It's really. I hope Pompeo. There's rumors he's going to now move over to state potentially. There's a lot of shuffling. I think I'm hearing some rumors from the administration. I won't talk about them until they're confirmed, but that there's going to be some shuffling going on in senior cabinet positions. But I really hope somebody's looking at this.
Right. Another interesting thing about this article I liked is it did describe the tension that can exist between law enforcement and intelligence organizations. It said, the DEA is very good at certain things, but when it comes to other things, they are, and the article accurately represented this, they're regarded as sometimes a little cowboyish by the CIA, which is generally more measured and careful. Right. But so basically, law enforcement wants prosecutions and intelligence wants to continue a flow of information. And those things often act in opposition to one another.
Yeah, right. They're on perpendicular
But you gotta strike a compromise, right? I mean, I've worked with the FBI much more than the DIA, and there's always a tension there because you have slightly different goals. But at the end of the day, you need to sit down and look at. In the case, this was spelled out pretty well that, okay, the CIA could justify maybe not going after certain individuals based on we need to collect further intelligence on them. However, when I read something about, a Quds Force U.S. cell operating in the United States, okay, at the end of the day, the CIA should be dedicated to action. Okay, we collect intelligence, we learn as much as we can, but there's a certain time where you have to fish or cut bait. And if there's a U.S. Quds Force cell, then you gather your intel, but then you need to go in there and break that door down.
Well, you look, it's very similar. It's a macro example of a micro law enforcement example, right? If you're going after La Cosa Nostra, mob guys, wise guys, you want information to flow, so you're not going to burn everybody who you have a wire up on, right? But if you know there's a hit team out there looking to whack rival capos, you're going to go shut them down. You're also not going to let people get murdered, right? I mean, and there's a way to do that without burning the asset, without burning the surveillance. And so what they did here, It seems to me anyway, that the Obama administration purposefully, with intent, didn't go after what was a clear present and imminent threat to U.S. citizens by breaking up those Quds Force cells in the U.S. I mean, to stress and piggyback on what you said earlier, this is equivalent to a Delta team operating inside of Iran with the knowledge of the Iranian government and the Iranian government doing nothing about it. It would never happen.
That's actually you're exactly right, John. That is exactly what it is equivalent to. That's right.
Yeah.
And ex-Obama administration officials have not admitted to this. They don't really want to discuss it.
They won't talk about
contacted
it, yeah.
Brennan, right? But there were revelations. Some of the former officials involved. There was a Catherine Bauer who was involved. She was an Obama Treasury official,
Right.
and her quote was, "Under Obama, the investigation was tamped down for fear of rocking the boat with Iran." This was in some obscure testimony she gave.
I read that.
So it is out there. Even they themselves knew what they were doing, even though they deny it now.
I read it. That made my blood boil because, there was such apathy to public safety from this administration.
That's right.
And I truly believe that Barack Obama fundamentally hated the United States. He hated American exceptionalism, and he wanted us to be on par with the lowest common denominator third world countries. He went out there to
did a damn good job of it. That's right.
He did a damn good job of it. He went out there on an appeasement tour with people that wanted to kill us, basically saying, we agree with you. We should be killed for the horrible things we did. How do we make it better? Should we be good demi? Should we get on our knees and bow down to you? What should we do? What will make you like us? How much should we appease you? It was so reprehensible what he did to the image of the United States globally. And now we know look, I said this, I tweeted to Eric Holder the other day on Twitter. I said, you used to only be a gun runner, now you're a drug dealer. Well, now he's a gun runner, a drug dealer, and he enabled a guy to deal chemical weapons to Syria because Eric Holder was the attorney general for most of this.
That's right.
I mean,
That's right. And this is and it's all these things that, make your blood boil, make any patriot's blood boil. This is the reason why I'm running for Congress, because I feel compelled to do something about it. I have the skill set that I can try to do something about this, and I'm determined to do that because it's disgusting what we're seeing. And
the only word.
The more every day there are more warts revealed from what we already knew was a disastrous foreign policy, but now we're seeing the granularity of just how bad it actually was.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think Bill Clinton and even Jimmy Carter, the world's most jellyfish spine appeaser, would have ever allowed a global crime syndicate. Well, let me take that back from Bill Clinton. They are a global crime syndicate. But Jimmy Carter, I don't think.
Well, this would have been competition for them.
Yeah, this would have been competition for the Clinton.
They would have eliminated them because they would have
been whacking each other left and right. Yeah, Hillary would have been there with the cigar and the machine gun, the old Tommy gun. Mob Barker Clinton. But I don't think Jimmy Carter would have done this. I don't think the old school Democrats would ever have allowed a global crime syndicate. No. Look, Jimmy Carter was spineless, but the man was a World War II hero. He was a patriot. He was just misguided on how to go about handling bad guys. But I think the rule of law meant something to guys like him.
That's right. Yeah. And this just shows you, this is another sign of how left the Democrats have lurched, that, they no longer even believe that, America is the most decent country in the world. They, in fact, think quite the opposite. It's like the worst country in the world.
We're the worst country in the world. Scott, my buddy, my friend, as always, it is such an interesting time with you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. How can people find out more about you and your congressional run?
Well, I'm on Facebook, Scott Ulinger for Congress. People can certainly like that, and that would be gratefully received. And then also the campaign site is Scott4FOR4PA.com.
Very, very easy. And how about on Twitter?
And on Twitter, I'm at the Station Chief.
At the Station Chief on Twitter.
Scott Ulinger at the Station Chief, right? At the
Station Chief on Twitter, Scott FORPA on the web, and Scott Ulinger for Congress on Facebook. Scott, as always, an absolute pleasure. We're going to do this again next week, because I'm sure something else is going to break. Thanks, my friend.
Probably. Thanks.
Have a great one. Incredibly interesting stuff, isn't it? And I want to keep bringing it to you. So please subscribe to our premium service at www.therebel.media/shows. If you're already a subscriber, thank you so much. I'll be back with you tomorrow. Thanks very much for watching.